My wife abandoned our kids after her friends told her she was wasting her youth. 9 years later, she showed up, expecting to be their mom again, but they already have a mom. It was about 9 years ago when my son Jake was just 6, and my daughter Emma was 4, that my ex, Sarah, made a choice that flipped our world upside down. Our marriage wasn't smooth sailing. A lot of that was on me because I was always working and probably not around as much as I should have been. But we were both trying to keep things together for our kids. Things took a turn when Sarah started hanging out with some friends from her yoga class. They were all either divorced or single and were pretty vocal about traditional family life and how they believed it held women back. One of these friends, Jessica, had ditched her family years earlier to live out of a van and travel. She kept telling Sarah how she was wasting her best years on domestic stuff. Initially, I thought Sarah just needed a break, so I'd encourage her to go on weekend trips with these friends, even taking on more of the kids' care so she could have her me time. But instead of helping our relationship, it drove a wedge between us. She started to believe that getting married and having kids young was a mistake. The tipping point came during what was supposed to be a fun family beach trip, but Sarah spent most of her time on the phone with Jessica and those friends talking about feeling trapped. On our last night, after the kids were asleep, Sarah told me straight up that she wanted to leave and start fresh somewhere else to find herself without family ties. Jessica had apparently offered her a spot in California. Devastated doesn't even begin to cover how I felt. I tried everything: marriage counseling, therapy, a trial separation, and even the idea of an open marriage. But Sarah had made up her mind and saw my attempt as control. The hardest part was seeing Jake and Emma so heartbroken. Jake kept asking if he did something that made Mommy leave, while Emma was just in tears, begging her mom not to go. Once Sarah left, I found myself in uncharted territory as a single dad of 2 young kids, who were not only dealing with their mom leaving, but also constantly asking when she'd come back. Meanwhile, I was trying to make sense of my own feelings of betrayal and loss. The first few months were rough, juggling work, childcare, and my emotions while trying to maintain stability for Jake and Emma. Sarah would call now and then in the first year, usually late at night when she'd been drinking. These calls just confused and hurt the kids more, as she made plans to visit that never happened. Eventually, I changed our number, telling her not to call anymore because the inconsistency was tearing the kids apart. About 3 years after Sarah left, I met Lisa at a school event. She was volunteering as Emma's teacher. We started as friends, and over time, that grew into something more. Lisa was amazing with the kids, never trying to replace Sarah, but just being there for them as they slowly began to trust her. She helped with homework, showed up for Jake's soccer games, and just became a part of our daily life. After a couple of years together, we discussed adoption. Lisa was all in, wanting to be their parent no matter what happened between us. The adoption process was smooth because Sarah had vanished from the picture, making no effort to stay in touch or support us. Finalizing the adoption was one of the happiest days of our lives. Jake and Emma, now teens, call Lisa Mom naturally. They remember Sarah, but view her more like a distant memory rather than a current part of their lives. Then 3 weeks ago, out of nowhere, Sarah showed up at our door. She looked older but much the same, and talked about how leaving was the biggest mistake of her life. She said she'd spent years traveling and searching for happiness, only to realize it was here all along. I was taken aback. I invited her in and called Lisa. Despite feeling awkward, Lisa was polite and listened as Sarah talked about wanting to be part of our family again. But she seemed to expect that she could just waltz back into our lives as though nothing had changed. She talked about wanting to rebuild her relationship with the kids. When Jake and Emma got home and saw Sarah, their reactions were immediate. Jake was angry, asking if she thought she could just return and everything would be okay. Emma clung to Lisa and refused to look at Sarah. They both made it clear they weren't interested in rekindling any relationship with Sarah, seeing Lisa as their true mom now. Sarah was crushed by their rejection, trying to plead with them for a fresh start, but Jake cut her off, saying she couldn't make up for 9 years of absence. After Sarah took off, Lisa and I sat down with Jake and Emma for a heart-to-heart. We wanted to know what they truly wanted, making it super clear that we'd back them up no matter what. We didn't want them to feel like they had to have a relationship with Sarah if they weren't keen on it. Both Jake and Emma were pretty firm. They wanted nothing to do with Sarah. They didn't want her popping by our place or trying to get in touch at school. They even asked us to make it clear to her that they were happy with their life as it was and didn't need her around. So I called Sarah. I might come off as a bit harsh here, but I told her straight up that while I got her wish to reconnect, the kids had spoken, and I was going to stand by their choice. They're old enough to decide who belongs in their lives, and after 9 years of growing a stable family with Lisa, they weren't in the mood to shake things up for someone who left on their own terms. Sarah wasn't pleased. She accused me of turning the kids against her and threatened to take legal steps to enforce visitation or even fight for partial custody. I doubted she actually had a leg to stand on legally, given she abandoned them and let Lisa adopt them. I kept second-guessing myself, wondering if I was doing the right thing. Even though I thought Sarah's sudden urge to play mom again was more about her own guilt than really caring about Jake and Emma, I worried whether I was denying them the chance to know their biological mom. So, folks of Reddit, am I a jerk for backing my kids' decision to cut off contact with their biological mom, or should I be nudging them to give her another shot? Update 1. Had a bunch of new developments that I didn't foresee, and could use more advice on how we're dealing with Sarah trying to worm her way back into our family scene. After reading through your comments, I thought it'd be smart to consult a family lawyer and a therapist who specializes in adoption stuff. I wanted to be sure that my actions came from a place of prioritizing Jake and Emma, rather than just reacting. The legal talk was a big eye-opener and a relief. The lawyer confirmed what some of you were saying, that Sarah basically had no rights since she'd abandoned her parental duties, and Lisa adopted them without her consent. In our state, if a parent cuts off contact for over a year and doesn't support their kid financially, they can lose their rights. This was exactly Sarah's situation. Legally speaking, Sarah was out of luck when it came to demanding visits or custody. To challenge the adoption, she'd have to prove she was somehow barred from keeping in touch, which wasn't true as she was the one who walked away. I called Sarah to lay down the legal facts and share the kids' feelings, hoping she'd realize that fighting this was useless and potentially damaging. That didn't pan out as I'd hoped. She got mad, saying I was using legal mumbo-jumbo to keep her away, as if Lisa's adoption was a sneaky trick rather than a result of her decisions. Sarah seemed to have painted a story in her head that downplayed her part in leaving and blamed outside factors like bad advice from friends and mental health issues. She acted like leaving was something that just happened rather than a choice she made. Surprised, there were real consequences. Sarah had these grand plans about making up for lost time, like taking Jake and Emma on trips, or helping with college plans, as if the past 9 years were just a short break. When I relayed that the kids were set on not seeing her, she broke down, claiming she understood their anger, but insisted she was a changed person and deserved a shot. Instead of pushing legal threats, Sarah asked if there could be some indirect communication, like letters or phone calls, so she could apologize without face-to-face interactions. I told her I'd bring this up with Lisa and the kids, making sure any communication would be on their terms and could be stopped whenever they wanted. Talking it over with Jake and Emma, they had strong but different reactions. After a few family talks and a therapy session, Emma thought she might take Sarah's phone number and consider occasional chats, with the condition that it didn't mean she wanted a full-blown relationship or in-person meetings. Jake stood firm on having zero contact. I made it clear to Sarah to respect Jake's decision. So yesterday, I shared Emma's, and surprisingly, Jake's phone numbers with Sarah, though he made no promises about answering and said he might change his mind. I laid out strict boundaries for when and how often Sarah could reach out, asking her to keep it to once or twice a week, and avoid calling during school or late at night. Sarah was really thankful for this arrangement and vowed to respect these limits. Still, I'm unsure if this was wise because I worry any contact might convince Sarah she can eventually wiggle her way back into being a bigger part of their lives, leading to more letdowns and issues. I don't want to be the one making all the choices for Jake and Emma, especially since Emma seems genuinely interested in testing the waters with some contact. We'll see how it all unfolds, but I wanted to update everyone and stress how your advice about putting the kids' emotional needs first has been invaluable. Update 2. So, as I mentioned earlier, we agreed to let Sarah have limited phone contact with the understanding she'd abide by the rules about how often she could call. At first, this seemed to run smoothly. Sarah called Emma twice that week, and Emma picked up both times. They had short civil conversations about school and Emma's hobbies, but Emma later told me the chats felt awkward, and she didn't know what to say to someone who was essentially a stranger, despite Sarah calling herself Emma's mom. Jake, as promised, dodged Sarah's calls and ended up blocking her after she rang him multiple times in one day. So, let's dive into this a bit. The whole thing started earlier this week. Emma, who's dealing with the stress of midterm exams and a big presentation she's really anxious about, started dodging Sarah's calls. She was swamped with studying and didn't have the emotional energy to handle what she called awkward chats with someone she felt didn't really know her. Now, instead of seeing that a 13-year-old like Emma might have bigger fish to fry, Sarah got all worked up about not reaching her and began bombarding her with calls. She left these increasingly desperate voicemails, practically begging Emma to call back, worried maybe she'd said something wrong or that Emma was being kept from speaking to her. Emma showed me these voicemails, and I gotta say, they were concerning. Sarah sounded overly emotional and almost frantic, talking about how much she missed Emma. She was going on about how pivotal these chats were for her mental health and her hope for rebuilding their relationship. One particular message was really unsettling. Sarah said she'd been eagerly waiting for their talks all week, and that not hearing back from Emma was dredging up all these old feelings of loss and regret. When I discussed this with Emma, she confessed the voicemails were making her feel guilty and anxious. She was beginning to regret ever agreeing to any contact, feeling Sarah wanted more than she could give. For Emma, chatting with Sarah felt more like a chore, like homework, rather than something she wanted to do. I assured Emma she didn't owe Sarah anything and could cut off the calls any time without feeling guilty. We agreed she'd take a break from phone conversations to concentrate on her schoolwork and give herself some space to figure out if she even wanted to continue this situation. But instead of understanding Emma's need for space or even checking with me about why her calls weren't being answered, Sarah went and did something that completely shattered my trust in her ability to prioritize the kids' needs over her own desires. Yesterday afternoon, I got a call from Emma's school counselor saying an unknown woman had shown up at the school claiming to be Emma's mom and insisted on seeing her. Things escalated when the school had to call security because the woman got all agitated and refused to leave when informed she wasn't authorized to meet Emma. Turns out, Sarah had walked into the school office during lunch, saying she was Emma's biological mom and needed to talk to her daughter because there was a family emergency. But when the school checked their records, they saw Lisa was listed as Emma's mother and told Sarah she couldn't see Emma without proper authorization. According to the counselor, Sarah got very upset and started arguing with the staff, insisting there was some mix-up in their records, claiming she was Emma's real mom and had every right to see her child, accusing the school of interfering with her parental rights. Things got out of hand when Sarah apparently tried to find Emma on her own, walking down the hallways, peeking into classrooms. This forced the school to call security, and eventually the police had to escort her off the premises. When I picked Emma up from school, she was visibly upset and embarrassed. She kept asking why Sarah had come to her school and if this meant Sarah was going to start showing up at places where Emma was supposed to feel safe. She also blamed herself, thinking it was somehow her fault for not answering Sarah's calls. That honestly broke my heart, because a 13-year-old shouldn't feel responsible for an adult's inappropriate actions. I called Sarah immediately, and in no uncertain terms, told her that going to Emma's school was absolutely unacceptable. She'd crossed every boundary we'd set and broken all the trust we had in her. I explained how her actions had scared Emma and caused precisely the kind of drama we'd been trying to avoid. Instead of understanding, Sarah got all defensive and emotional, saying she'd been worried because she hadn't heard from Emma for several days and just wanted to make sure she was okay. She said she hadn't meant to pressure her with the voicemails, claiming she hadn't intended to cause trouble and had lied about the family emergency because she didn't know how else to get the school to let her see Emma. When I pointed out there was no family emergency and she had essentially deceived school officials and tried to bypass safety protocols, Sarah said not being able to talk to her daughter felt like an emergency to her. She didn't understand why everyone was making it so hard when all she wanted was a connection with her kids. This response clearly showed how Sarah completely misunderstood the situation and how self-centered her approach was. She viewed any obstacle to immediate access to Jake and Emma as unfair rather than understanding that her children are individuals with their own feelings and a right to privacy and safety. I told Sarah that her behavior at the school had completely erased any chance of continued phone contact, and she needed to completely stay away from our family, including not showing up at places where the kids might be. I also informed her that if she broke these boundaries again, I'd have no choice but to pursue a restraining order. Sarah got very upset and began to cry, accusing me of being cruel, claiming I was using her mistake to punish her and keep her away from her children permanently. But I made it clear this wasn't about punishment. It was about protecting Jake and Emma from someone who clearly couldn't respect their autonomy or prioritize their well-being over her own wants. Both kids have been very clear. They want no fur. Their contact with Sarah after this incident. And Emma seems relieved she doesn't have to worry about managing Sarah's expectations anymore. I'm honestly kicking myself for agreeing to any contact at all because, in hindsight, I should have anticipated that someone who had abandoned her children for 9 years and then suddenly showed up demanding an immediate relationship might not have the emotional stability to respect reasonable boundaries. I'll keep you updated on whether Sarah respects the no-contact boundary or if we need to take legal steps. But for now, we're focused on making sure Jake and Emma feel safe and secure, and reminding them that Sarah's behavior is not their responsibility. Update 3. So after the school incident I mentioned in my last update, we went full no contact with Sarah, making it clear to both kids that they didn't need to worry about managing her expectations anymore. They could just focus on their normal lives without the added stress of navigating a relationship with someone who couldn't respect their boundaries. For about a week, this plan seemed to be working pretty well. Jake and Emma looked relieved, happy to move forward without constant anxiety about when Sarah might call or unexpectedly show up. Then came last Friday evening. Emma approached me and Lisa with a request that honestly threw us off guard, and I'm still not sure we handled it right. She told us she'd been mulling over the voicemail Sarah had left before the school fiasco, and while she absolutely didn't want an ongoing relationship with Sarah, she felt like she needed to make one call. Emma wanted to clearly explain her decision and directly tell Sarah she didn't want any further contact. Instead of just letting me pass along the message, Emma really wanted to speak directly to Sarah. She was feeling guilty about how things had ended, with Sarah getting escorted out of the school and then having me break the news that she couldn't contact Emma anymore. Emma thought Sarah deserved to hear from her directly about why she didn't want to have a relationship, even if it was going to be a tough conversation. Lisa and I chatted a lot with Emma about this, reassuring her that she didn't owe Sarah anything and that she needed to look after her own well-being first. We also mentioned that a call like this could give Sarah false hope, or that she might use it to push for more contact. But Emma was really set on her decision and seemed to have thought through any possible risks. She told us she wanted to explain to Sarah that while she didn't hate her and got that Sarah felt sorry for leaving, too much damage had been done, and too much time had passed for them to have the kind of mother-daughter relationship Sarah seemed to be hoping for. We all agreed to make the call on speaker, so Lisa and I could keep tabs and step in if needed. Emma also prepared a list of points she wanted to cover to help her stay on track if things got emotional with Sarah. The call happened this past Saturday afternoon, and it went both better and worse than any of us had expected. Emma was super mature in how she spoke to Sarah. She let Sarah know she appreciated the apologies and the effort to make things right, but she had built a life and family without Sarah, and she didn't want to change that or jeopardize her happiness with Lisa as her mother. Sarah, to her credit, listened without cutting in or arguing and seemed to grasp that this was Emma's final word on the matter. Sarah told Emma she was proud of who she'd become and glad that Emma had found happiness and stability, even if it wasn't with her. However, towards the end, Sarah got really emotional and told Emma she understood why she wasn't wanted in her life. She admitted to making mistakes that cost her the chance to be a mom to her kids. She said she had hoped apologizing would somehow make up for all the lost years, but she realized now that some things just can't be fixed, and some choices can't be undone. What was particularly worrying was the way she sounded during this part. Almost hopeless, like she was saying goodbye to everything, not just the chance of a relationship with Emma. She talked about how she had ruined everything and felt she didn't deserve happiness. Emma did her best to stay focused on her own decisions and not let Sarah's despair pull her into comforting her. But you could tell she was upset hearing how despondent Sarah was. The call ended with Sarah thanking Emma for the bravery to talk to her directly and telling her she hoped Emma would have a wonderful life and apologizing for the pain her return had caused. Emma told Sarah she forgave her for leaving and hoped Sarah would find happiness, but it was clear they wouldn't be talking again. After we hung up, Emma seemed relieved to have the conversation, feeling she had expressed herself clearly and kindly, though she was emotionally drained and spent the rest of the weekend processing everything with Lisa and me. We thought the talk was the closure both Emma and Sarah needed to move on with their separate lives, and while it was emotionally tough, it seemed like a healthy way to close this chapter. But then, this past Tuesday morning, I got a phone call that turned everything upside down and made me question if we had handled things right from the start. The call was from a hospital social worker where Sarah was living, letting me know Sarah had been taken to their psychiatric unit after what looked like a suicide attempt, and I was still listed as her emergency contact from when we used to be married, even though we've been divorced for 9 years. The social worker said Sarah had taken an overdose of prescription meds Monday night, and her landlord found her after she didn't pay her rent. She left a note saying she was sorry for the pain she'd caused her family, and realizing she'd lost her children forever. This news completely stunned and horrified me. My first thought was whether Emma's call had triggered this, and if supporting Emma's decision to end contact had put Sarah in a dangerous mental state. For now, I've only shared this with Lisa. I also called the hospital social worker to explain our family situation and let them know Sarah walked out on the kids 9 years ago, and any contact with her had been traumatic for them. I asked them to tell Sarah that while we hope she gets the mental health help she needs, we won't be visiting or involved in her care. I also gave them Sarah's sister's contact info, thinking she might be able to support Sarah since we couldn't be there for her, even if they were miles apart. The social worker understood our position and reassured me that the hospital staff wouldn't pressure us to have contact with Sarah and would focus on linking her with appropriate mental health resources and support systems outside of her children. It's been a few days since that call, and I'm still wrestling with whether we could have handled things differently, if we missed any warning signs, and if protecting my kids from Sarah's instability was worth the risk of her harming herself from feeling utterly rejected. I wanted to update all of you who have been following our story because this new development obviously changes the situation significantly. I hope that by sharing what we're going through, it might help other families dealing with similar challenges around estranged parents wanting to reconnect with kids who've moved on. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy hearing stories like mine, don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.